At 2 a.m., my husband's female boss texted me from his phone. "He's mine now, he's occupied." "Don't wait up," she wrote. I replied, "Keep him, we're done." 20 minutes later, they showed up at my door, her smile proud, his face pale. But what happened next made her regret ever sending that text. At 2:30 in the morning, I heard a car pull into my driveway. I had just received the cruelest text message of my life from my husband's boss, sent from his phone, telling me he belonged to her now. I had replied that she could keep him, that we were done. Now they were both standing on my front porch. Through the peephole, I could see my husband Marcus looking terrified in his rumpled suit, and beside him was Simone Winters, his boss, smiling like she had just won a trophy. She was not embarrassed or apologetic. She was proud. She wanted me to see what she had taken from me. I opened the door and looked at them both, and in that moment I made a decision that would destroy her career and expose everything she had been hiding for years. She thought that text message announced her victory. She had no idea what was coming. Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing these stories of courage and accountability. If you believe that patterns of harm should be exposed and that silence protects predators, please consider subscribing. It helps us reach more people who need to hear this. Now let's see how this unfolds. But let me back up because the night had started differently. It had started with me waking to the buzzing of my phone at exactly 2 in the morning. That particular sound, means trouble before you even open your eyes. The bedroom was pitch dark, except for that blue glow cutting through the shadows from my phone screen. I reached for it with hands that were already shaking, my heart accelerating with that sick certainty that something had gone catastrophically wrong. My first thought was my mother. She'd been having chest pains lately, refusing to see a doctor because she insisted it was just indigestion. Or maybe Marcus's parents, who were getting older and lived 3 states away in a house that probably needed more help than they would admit. I grabbed the phone, expecting an emergency room notification or a panicked family call. Instead, I saw Marcus's name as the sender. Marcus, my husband of 7 years, who had left for the office at 6 yesterday evening to finish a presentation for a client meeting. Marcus, who should have been at his desk downtown surrounded by spreadsheets and coffee cups, not sending me messages in the middle of the night. Then I noticed the line underneath his name that made my stomach drop. The actual sender displayed as Simone Winters, his boss, the vice president of operations at the consulting firm where Marcus had been working for the past 18 months, climbing the corporate ladder with an ambition that had slowly consumed every other priority in his life, including our marriage. The message itself was 12 words that felt like they had been chosen deliberately, crafted to inflict maximum damage. "He's mine now. He's occupied. Don't wait up." I read it once, then again, then a third time, as though repetition might somehow change the meaning or reveal some alternative interpretation I had missed. But the words remained the same, stark and cruel in that glowing rectangle I held in my trembling hands. She had used his phone to send this. She had picked up his device, scrolled to my contact, typed out this message, and hit send, knowing exactly what she was doing. This was not some drunken mistake or a text sent to the wrong person. This was deliberate. This was Simone Winters announcing her conquest and making absolutely certain I understood that she had taken something that belonged to me. I sat there in the darkness of our bedroom, the room we had painted together 3 years ago, after debating for 2 weeks whether the color was dove gray or silver mist. The ceiling fan we had installed last summer during a heat wave rotated slowly above me. The same fan we had argued about because Marcus thought it was unnecessary, and I had insisted we needed it. The curtains we had chosen from 6 different samples spread across our dining room table, now hung motionless in the still air. 7 years of marriage suddenly felt like they were collapsing inward, compressing into a single point of failure that I had been too blind or too trusting to see approaching. My mind began racing backward through our entire relationship, through every moment and every choice that had led to this particular disaster unfolding. At 2 in the morning, Marcus and I had met at an architecture conference in Seattle. I was 28, working as a residential design consultant for a firm that specialized in sustainable building practices. He was 30, presenting a paper on innovative materials in commercial construction. We had coffee after his presentation, then dinner that same evening, then breakfast the next morning because neither of us wanted the conversation to end. He had been different then, thoughtful in small ways that made me believe we were building something solid and real. We got married 14 months later, overlooking vineyards in Napa Valley with 75 guests and sunshine that felt like nature itself was blessing our decision. My father walked me down the aisle in his best suit, his hand steady on my arm, his eyes bright with pride. 6 months after our wedding, his heart attack took him so suddenly that I never got to say goodbye. Marcus had held me through that grief, through the funeral arrangements and the estate paperwork and the long nights when I could not stop crying. He had whispered promises about facing everything together, about being a team no matter what challenges life threw at us. I had believed every single word. But somewhere in the past 18 months, after he had taken the position at the consulting firm where Simone Winters held power and influence over promotions and career trajectories, everything had begun to shift. The changes were gradual at first, easy to dismiss as natural pressures from a demanding new job. He started working later, coming home long after I'd already gone to bed. He traveled more frequently, business trips to Chicago and Boston and Atlanta that always seemed to include Simone in the delegation. His phone became an extension of his body, something he guarded with increasing paranoia, angling the screen away from me when notifications appeared, taking calls in the other room with the door closed, setting passwords I did not know and had never needed to know before. I had told myself it was career ambition. Marcus had always wanted recognition, had always felt he was capable of more than his previous positions had allowed. This new job was his opportunity to prove himself, to climb to the level he believed he deserved. I had supported that ambition. I had encouraged him to take the position even when it meant longer hours and more stress and significantly less time together as a couple. The signs had been there. I just had not wanted to see them. The new cologne he started wearing 3 months ago, something expensive and sophisticated that I had never helped him select. The way he angled his phone away whenever notifications appeared, a subtle but unmistakable gesture of concealment. The business trips where he would forget to call for entire evenings, then text hours later with vague excuses about client dinners running late or hotel internet being unreliable. The growing emotional distance that had transformed us from partners into polite roommates who shared space and split household expenses, but no longer shared anything meaningful. My hands moved before my conscious mind fully decided what to do. I opened a new message and typed 7 words. Keep him. We're done. Then I hit send before doubt or fear or pride could stop me. Those 7 words felt powerful in their simplicity. No begging, no negotiation, no emotional appeals that would give either of them the satisfaction of seeing me broken. Just a clear declaration that if this was how things were going to be, then I was walking away with my dignity intact. I did not expect what happened next. Within 2 minutes, my phone started ringing. Marcus's number. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately. Voicemail again. Then a text message appeared. Jada, please answer. This is not what you think. This is Marcus. Please. But I knew better. I knew exactly what this was. This was panic. This was the realization that consequences were arriving faster than expected. This was Marcus understanding that the text message from Simone's hand using his phone had just detonated his marriage. And now he was desperately trying to contain the explosion. I did not respond. Instead, I got out of bed, turned on every light in the house, and began making coffee. If I was going to be awake at 2:15 in the morning, dealing with my marriage imploding, I was at least going to be caffeinated. My hands were steady as I measured grounds and added water, which surprised me. I had expected trembling, tears, collapse. Instead, I felt calm, dangerously, unnaturally calm. The kind of calm that comes right before calculated action, before decisions that cannot be reversed, before crossing lines you have never approached before. I heard the car first, then voices on my front porch, then the doorbell ringing. Once, then twice, then continuously, as though whoever was pressing it had forgotten how doorbells were supposed to work. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. Marcus stood there in his wrinkled suit, his tie loosened, his hair disheveled in a way that suggested he had been running his hands through it repeatedly. His face was pale, his eyes wild with something between fear and desperation. And beside him, still composed, still confident, stood Simone Winters. She was exactly as I remembered from the company events I had attended with Marcus over the past year and a half. Tall, elegant, in her early 40s, with the kind of polished appearance that came from expensive stylists and personal trainers, and a clothing budget that exceeded our monthly mortgage payment. Her hair was perfect despite the hour, her makeup still flawless. Her expression was something between amusement and triumph. She was not embarrassed to be standing on my porch at 2:30 in the morning. She was proud. She had come here deliberately, not to apologize or explain, but to display what she had taken, to make absolutely certain I understood that she had won, that Marcus was hers now, that I had been replaced by someone superior in every way that corporate culture valued. I opened the door and looked at them both. "Jada," Marcus started immediately, his voice cracking with urgency. "Please, you have to listen to me. That text, I know you didn't send it," I said calmly. "Simone did, using your phone." Marcus's face confirmed what I already knew. The text had not been some shared decision or mutual announcement. It had been Simone's choice, her power play, her way of claiming territory and forcing a situation that Marcus might have preferred to handle differently, or more likely, might have preferred to continue hiding indefinitely while maintaining both his marriage and his affair in separate compartmentalized spheres of his duplicitous life. "Can we come in?" Marcus asked. "We need to talk about this." "No," I said simply. "There's nothing to talk about. You made your choice. She made it clear in her text message. You're hers now, so go be hers." "You don't understand," Marcus insisted, his voice rising with frustration. "It's complicated. The situation at work, the pressure, I understand perfectly," I interrupted. "Your boss wanted you. You wanted your career advancement. You chose accordingly. Now those choices have consequences." Simone had been watching this exchange with visible amusement, but now she spoke for the first time. "Jada, is it? I think you're being unnecessarily dramatic about what is essentially a professional relationship that developed beyond its original parameters." Her voice was smooth, practiced, the tone of someone accustomed to controlling narratives and managing crises. "A professional relationship," I repeated slowly. "Is that what you're calling it? Is sending text messages at 2 a.m. from someone else's phone to announce you've claimed their husband's standard professional behavior at your company?" Something flickered in Simone's expression, a crack in the polished facade, a moment where the careful control slipped just enough to reveal uncertainty underneath. "The text was inappropriate," she admitted. "I had been drinking. It was poor judgment. But Marcus and I have a genuine connection that developed naturally through our work together. These things happen in professional environments. Adults handle them like adults, not like scorned teenagers throwing tantrums." "Adults," I said, feeling something cold and sharp crystallizing in my chest, "handle them like adults, by hiding, by lying, by sneaking around, by sending cruel messages in the middle of the night. Those are your adult choices?" "Jada," Marcus tried again, reaching toward me. Please, can we just talk inside? Without your boss present? I finished. Why would we do that? She sent the text message. She's part of this conversation. She wanted me to know about this situation badly enough to make sure I received formal notification. So let's all be adults together right here on the porch. I saw Marcus and Simone exchange a glance, some wordless communication passing between them. Marcus's face was desperate, pleading. Simone's expression had shifted from amusement to calculation, as though she was reassessing the situation and considering her options. I should explain, Marcus began, how this started, why it happened. I don't need your explanations, I said. I need you to leave, both of you. You sent me a message saying he's yours now. I accepted that. I told you to keep him. So keep him. Take him. He's yours. I'm done. You can't just be done, Marcus protested. We've been married for 7 years. We own a house together. We have a life together. You can't throw all of that away because of one mistake. One night when... One mistake? I interrupted. Marcus, I've watched you pulling away for months. The late nights, the business trips, the password-protected phone, the emotional distance. This text message wasn't the mistake. This text message was just the announcement of something that's been happening for much longer than tonight. I saw the truth register on his face, the realization that I had not been as oblivious as he had assumed, that I had noticed the changes, documented the patterns, understood more than I had revealed while I had been deciding whether to confront what I knew or continue pretending everything was fine. If you've known, he said slowly, then why didn't you say something? Why didn't you ask me what was going on? Because I wanted to see what you would do, I answered. Whether you would choose your marriage or your ambition, whether you would come clean or keep lying, whether you would respect me enough to be honest about what was happening. And now I have my answer. You chose her. You chose this. So now you get to live with what you chose. I started to close the door, but Simone spoke again. Jada, wait. I think we should discuss this reasonably. Marcus tells me you're in architecture. You understand professional ambition. You understand that sometimes people's lives take unexpected directions, that connections develop that weren't planned. We're all educated adults. Surely we can handle this situation with maturity and mutual respect. There was something in her tone that finally broke through my calm. Not the affair itself, not even the text message, but this assumption that she could stand on my porch at 2:30 in the morning with my husband beside her and lecture me about maturity and mutual respect. This belief that I should accept her narrative, accommodate her choices, make space for her entitlement to take what she wanted without resistance or consequence. Mutual respect, I said quietly. Is that what you showed me when you sent that text? When you told me my husband was yours now, when you made sure I knew exactly what you had taken from me, that was your version of respect? Simone's composure cracked further. I've already acknowledged the text was inappropriate, but you're acting like you're the first woman who ever dealt with a complicated situation in her marriage. These things happen. They're part of adult life. You can either accept reality and move forward reasonably, or you can make this ugly and difficult for everyone involved. Ugly and difficult, I repeated, for everyone involved. Tell me, Simone, does your company know you're sleeping with married employees who report to you? Does HR have documentation of this professional connection that developed naturally? Does the board know that their vice president of operations uses her authority to pursue sexual relationships with subordinates? The change in Simone's expression was immediate and unmistakable. The polished confidence vanished, replaced by something sharp and dangerous. You're making serious allegations, she said carefully. Allegations that could constitute defamation if you repeat them without evidence. I'm not making allegations, I said. I'm asking questions. But it's interesting that your immediate response is to threaten legal action rather than deny the behavior. Marcus stepped between us, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Jada, please, don't do this. Don't make threats about Simone's career. This is between us, between you and me. Leave her out of it. She sent the text message, I reminded him. She inserted herself into this situation. She made herself part of this. So no, I won't leave her out of it. If you try to damage my professional reputation, Simone said, her voice hard now, all pretense of reasonableness abandoned, I will destroy you. I have resources and connections you cannot imagine. I will bury you in legal costs until you have nothing left. I felt myself smile, which surprised all three of us. You think I'm afraid of you? You think threats will make me back down and disappear quietly so you can continue whatever you've been doing? I think you should consider carefully whether you want to make an enemy of someone who has the power to make your life very difficult, Simone said. What you should consider, I said, is that I've been awake since 2 a.m., documenting everything. That text message from Marcus's phone, the timestamp, your name as the sender, this conversation, all of it. And you should consider that I'm not the desperate, emotional mess you assumed you'd encounter. I'm someone who makes decisions based on evidence and long-term planning. So before you threaten to destroy me, maybe ask yourself whether you've considered how easily your career could be destroyed by a well-documented pattern of inappropriate conduct. I saw uncertainty cross Simone's face. She had expected tears, begging, emotional collapse. She had not expected calculation, documentation, strategic thinking. She had underestimated me completely, had assumed that sending that cruel text message would reduce me to a broken wife who would quietly disappear while she continued claiming her prize. You're bluffing, Simone said, but there was doubt in her voice. Am I? I asked. Feel free to find out. Keep making threats. Keep assuming I'll protect your secret. Keep believing I'll prioritize your reputation over my own dignity. See where that gets you. Marcus grabbed Simone's arm. We should go. This isn't productive. We're not accomplishing anything here. But Simone shook him off, her focus entirely on me now. What do you want? She asked bluntly. What's it going to take for you to let this go? Money? A quiet divorce with generous settlement terms? What? I want you to understand, I said, that actions have consequences. That you can't treat people as disposable and expect them to accept it silently. That the text message you sent tonight was the worst decision you ever made, not because it revealed an affair, but because it gave me evidence, documentation, proof of behavior that I'm guessing your company's board of directors would find very interesting. This is blackmail, Simone said. No, I corrected. Blackmail would be threatening to expose you unless you pay me or do something specific. I'm not asking for anything, I'm just explaining that your assumption that I'll quietly disappear while you continue your pattern was incorrect. Pattern? Marcus asked. What pattern? I looked at him. You think you're special. You think this is the first time she's done this? You think a woman in her position with her power and access hasn't developed a very specific approach to getting what she wants from the men who work under her. I saw it dawn on Marcus's face, the realization that he was not unique, not special, not part of some grand love story that transcended normal boundaries. He was part of a pattern, a repeating behavior, one in a series of married men that Simone had targeted, pursued, and claimed while holding career advancement over their heads as implicit leverage. That's not true, Marcus said. But he was looking at Simone now, searching her face for confirmation or denial. Simone's silence was answer enough. I hired a private investigator 6 weeks ago, I said, watching both their faces carefully. After the third business trip where you forgot to call, Marcus, after I noticed the pattern I just mentioned. The investigator has been documenting everything. The hotel stays, the restaurants, the rental car records, the other men, the previous pattern at Simone's last company before she took this position. All of it. Everything you thought was private and hidden. It's documented. The color drained from Simone's face. You're lying, she whispered. Am I? I pulled out my phone and opened an email I had received 3 hours earlier at 11:00 p.m., just 3 hours before that text message had arrived. The private investigator's weekly report, complete with photographs, credit card receipts, and interviews with former employees from Simone's previous company who had been willing to discuss her history of targeting married subordinates and then using HR complaints and legal threats to silence anyone who objected. I held up the phone so they could see the subject line and the first few lines of the report, but not the details. Let them imagine what information I possessed. Let them wonder exactly how much I knew and how much evidence I had gathered. "It's all documented," I repeated. The affair, the pattern, the previous complaints that were settled quietly, the HR violations, everything. And you just threatened to destroy me. You just gave me the perfect motivation to make all of it public, to send it to your board, to your HR department, to the local business reporters who I'm sure would find this story absolutely fascinating. "You wouldn't," Simone said, but her voice had lost all conviction. "Why not?" I asked. "Because it would embarrass me? Because people would know my husband cheated? I'm already past caring about that. As of 2 a.m., when I got your text message, I stopped caring what anyone thinks about my failed marriage. But you, Simone, you still care very much what people think about your professional reputation, about your executive position, about your carefully constructed image as a successful woman in corporate leadership." Marcus stepped forward. "Jada, please. If you do this, you'll ruin both our lives. My career will be over. I'll never work in this industry again. Please don't do this out of spite or revenge. We can work this out. We can figure out something that doesn't destroy everything." "You destroyed everything," I said. "When you chose this, when you chose her, when you let her send that text message from your phone instead of stopping her, you destroyed what we had. I'm just deciding what to do with the pieces." "Give us 24 hours, Simone said suddenly. "Don't send anything to anyone for 24 hours. Let me think about this. Let me consider my options." "Your options," I said, "are limited. You can walk away now and hope I decide to keep your secrets. Or you can keep threatening me, keep assuming I'll protect you, and find out exactly how much damage I'm willing to cause when someone tries to intimidate me in my own home at 2:30 in the morning." "What do you want me to do?" Simone asked, and for the first time she sounded genuinely frightened rather than angry or calculating. "I want you to leave," I said. "I want you to understand that this is over. Whatever you thought you were building with Marcus, whatever professional consequences you thought you could avoid, all of it ends tonight. You gambled that sending that text message would break me. You gambled wrong." I looked at Marcus. "And you need to decide where you're going to sleep tonight, because it's not here. You made your choice. Simone announced it clearly. You're hers now, so go be hers. Figure out your housing situation. Figure out your marriage situation. But figure it out somewhere else." "Jada," he tried one more time, 7 years. That has to mean something." "It meant everything," I said, "until it didn't. Until you chose career advancement over partnership. Until you let your boss announce your affair from your phone while I was sleeping. Those were your choices. These are the consequences." I closed the door while they were still standing there, while Marcus was still trying to form words that might somehow undo what had been done. While Simone was calculating whether she still had any leverage or control over this situation, I heard their voices continue outside, muffled through the door. Marcus's desperate, pleading tones, Simone's sharp, commanding responses, then footsteps, then a car engine starting, then silence. I stood in my living room in the house Marcus and I had bought together 3 years ago, surrounded by furniture we had selected as a couple, looking at wedding photos on the wall showing us smiling in a vineyard with sunshine and promises about forever, and I felt nothing. No tears, no regret, no second thoughts about what I had just done. Just calm, cold certainty that I had made the only possible choice when confronted with cruelty and entitled assumption that I would quietly accept whatever they chose to do to me. My phone buzzed. A text message from Marcus. Jada, please don't do anything with that information about Simone. We can talk about this tomorrow. We can work something out. Please. I did not respond. Instead, I forwarded the private investigator's report to 3 email addresses I had prepared earlier, in the weeks when I had been anticipating this confrontation might eventually arrive. The first was my attorney, Keisha Harrison, who I had consulted 6 weeks ago when I first suspected the affair and wanted to understand my options for divorce, property division, and protecting myself legally from whatever Marcus and his employer might do if things became hostile. The second was the HR director at Marcus's company, Tyrone Chen, whose email address I had found on the company website and who I was fairly certain did not know about Simone's history of pursuing married subordinates, given that she had been hired from outside the company 18 months ago with a carefully managed reputation that omitted the complaints and settlements from her previous employment. The third was LaShonda Williams, a business reporter at the city's largest newspaper who had written extensively about workplace harassment, about power imbalances in corporate settings, and about the ways that executive-level employees sometimes escaped accountability for behavior that would get lower-level workers immediately terminated. I sent all 3 emails with the same subject line: documented pattern of executive misconduct requiring immediate investigation. I attached the private investigator's full report, including photographs, receipts, interview transcripts, and a detailed timeline showing how Simone had systematically targeted married male employees at her previous company, how complaints had been settled quietly with non-disclosure agreements and financial payouts, and how she had continued the same pattern at her current position with Marcus and at least 2 other married men whose wives I had not yet contacted but whose information the investigator had uncovered. Then I turned off my phone, poured the coffee I had made earlier and which had been sitting on the counter getting cold while I confronted Marcus and Simone on my front porch, heated it in the microwave, and sat down at my kitchen table to begin making lists of what needed to happen next. Divorce attorney consultation, financial documentation, property assessment, separation of accounts, change of locks, notification to friends and family before they heard rumors or distorted versions from Marcus's side, planning for the immediate future and the longer-term rebuilding of a life that would be entirely my own. The sun rose at 6:15 a.m. I watched it through my kitchen window, sitting at the table with my 3rd cup of coffee and a legal pad covered in notes and lists and strategic planning. I had not slept, but I was not tired. I was running on adrenaline and cold determination and the clarity that comes from making irrevocable decisions and then moving forward without doubt or hesitation. My phone, which I had turned back on at 6 a.m., immediately filled with messages. 17 from Marcus, progressing from pleading to angry to desperate. 3 from Simone, all variations of threats about legal consequences if I had shared confidential information. 1 from Keisha Harrison, my attorney, sent at 5:30 a.m., saying she had received my email, had reviewed the documentation, and needed to speak with me as soon as possible about how to proceed with divorce proceedings and about the potential legal implications of having shared an investigation report with Marcus's employer and with a news reporter. 1 from my sister Aaliyah, asking if I was okay, because Marcus had called her at 4:00 a.m., sounding panicked and incoherent, claiming I had ruined his life and his career and threatening to take legal action against me for defamation. I responded only to Keisha, asking if she could meet this morning as early as possible. She replied within 3 minutes, her office at 8:01 a.m. She would clear her schedule. This was going to move quickly, and I needed to be prepared for how Marcus and his employer might respond. I showered, dressed in my most professional clothes, a navy suit I usually reserved for client presentations, and arrived at Keisha's office at 7:45 a.m. She was already there, sitting at her desk with the private investigator's report open on her computer screen, making notes on a legal pad that looked similar to the one I'd been filling throughout the night. "Tell me everything," she said as soon as I sat down, starting with that text message at 2 a.m. I walked her through the entire night. the text message from Simone using Marcus's phone, my 7-word response, their arrival at my house, the confrontation on my porch, Simone's threats, my revelation about the investigation, my decision to send the documentation to Marcus's HR department and to the reporter. Keisha listened without interrupting, making notes, occasionally nodding, her expression neutral until I finished. "You understand," she said carefully, "that sending that report to the company and to the press could be interpreted as retaliation, that Marcus and Simone may attempt to characterize your actions as a scorned wife, trying to damage their careers out of spite, that there could be legal challenges claiming you violated privacy or caused intentional infliction of emotional distress." "I understand," I said, "but the report documents illegal behavior, harassment, abuse of power, a pattern of conduct that violates company policy and potentially employment law. I'm not fabricating allegations. I'm sharing documented evidence of wrongdoing that affects more people than just me." "That's true," Keisha agreed. "And that's how we'll frame it if challenged, not as revenge, but as disclosure of information relevant to ongoing harmful behavior. Not as a privacy violation, but as whistleblowing on executive misconduct that the company has an obligation to investigate and address. But you need to be prepared for this to get ugly. Marcus will likely try to claim the investigation itself was illegal. Simone will definitely try to intimidate you into recanting or claiming the information was false. The company may try to settle quickly to avoid publicity, which would mean pressure on you to sign non-disclosure agreements and accept financial compensation in exchange for silence." "I won't sign anything that protects Simone," I said. "If the company wants to settle my divorce claims or compensate me for distress, fine, but I won't agree to any terms that prevent other people from knowing about her pattern of behavior." Keisha looked at me for a long moment, then smiled slightly. "Good. That's the right position. Now let's talk about the divorce itself. You said you want to file immediately." We spent the next 2 hours going through everything: financial documentation, property division, the house we had bought together, the joint accounts that needed to be separated, the retirement funds and investments that would need to be divided according to state law. I had done my research over the past 6 weeks while the private investigator was gathering information. I knew what to expect, what to request, what to prioritize. Marcus had been the primary earner during our marriage, making significantly more than I did as an architect for a small firm. But I had contributed substantially to the down payment on our house using inheritance money from my father's estate. I had managed our household finances, paid our bills, maintained our home while Marcus traveled constantly for his career. I had supported his ambitions, encouraged his professional development, sacrificed time together so he could work late and travel frequently. Under state law, all of that counted. All of that meant I was entitled to an equitable division of our marital assets, regardless of who had earned more. By 10:00 a.m., Keisha had drafted divorce paperwork. By 11:00 a.m., I had signed everything, and she had filed it electronically with the county court system. Marcus would be served with papers later today, probably at his office, which felt appropriate given that his office was where he had made the choices that ended our marriage. My phone rang at 11:30 a.m. Tyrone Chen, the HR director at Marcus's company. I answered. "Ms. Brooks," he said formally, "thank you for taking my call. I've received the documentation you sent this morning regarding allegations of misconduct involving one of our vice presidents. I need to speak with you about these claims as part of our internal investigation process." "What would you like to know?" I asked. "First, I need to confirm that this information came from a legitimate investigation and not from any illegal surveillance or privacy violations." The investigation was conducted by a licensed private investigator, Vincent Rodriguez, whose contact information is included in the report I sent you. All surveillance was conducted in public spaces or in locations where there was no reasonable expectation of privacy. Credit card records and travel bookings were obtained through legally permissible methods. Interviews with former employees were voluntary and documented with consent. Everything in that report would be admissible in legal proceedings. Second, Tyrone continued, I need to understand your motivation for sending this information to our company rather than simply using it in your personal divorce proceedings. Because, I said, the behavior documented in that report is not just about my marriage. It's about a pattern of conduct by an executive-level employee that creates liability for your company. Simone Winters has systematically targeted married male subordinates at her current and previous employers. She has used her authority to pursue sexual relationships with employees over whom she has power regarding promotions, assignments, and career advancement. That's harassment. That's creating a hostile work environment. That's behavior your company has policies against and legal obligations to address. Has your husband filed any complaints with our HR department about unwanted advances or pressure from Ms. Winters? Tyrone asked. I laughed, though there was no humor in it. No, my husband willingly participated. He made choices. But that doesn't change the fact that Simone Winters used her position of authority to pursue a relationship with a subordinate employee, which violates your company's code of conduct regardless of whether the subordinate employee welcomed the attention. And it doesn't change the fact that there are at least 2 other married men currently employed at your company who are documented in similar relationships with Ms. Winters. There was a long pause. The report mentions 2 other employees, Tyrone said carefully, but does not name them. Because they haven't been served divorce papers yet, I said, because their wives don't know yet. But they will, and when they do, your company will be facing multiple complaints and potentially multiple lawsuits about an executive who has been using her authority to create inappropriate relationships with married subordinates while the company failed to notice or intervene. Ms. Brooks, I want to be clear that we take these allegations very seriously. We will be conducting a thorough investigation. But I also need to tell you that if any of the information in your report is found to be false or exaggerated, there could be legal consequences for making defamatory statements about a company executive. Everything in that report, I said, is documented with evidence. Photographs, receipts, interviews, timeline records. I'm not making allegations, I'm reporting facts. If Simone Winters wants to claim defamation, she's welcome to do so in court, where all of that evidence will become public record. Somehow, I suspect she won't take that approach. Tyrone was quiet for another moment. We'll be in touch as our investigation proceeds. You may be contacted for formal interviews or depositions. I'll cooperate fully, I said. Send me whatever paperwork you need. I'll make myself available. I hung up and immediately got another call. LaShonda Williams, the business reporter. Ms. Brooks, this is LaShonda Williams from the Tribune. I received the documentation you sent about executive misconduct at a local consulting firm. I'd like to verify some details and possibly interview you for a story I'm working on about workplace power imbalances and harassment. What do you need to know? I asked. LaShonda was professional, thorough, asking specific questions about the timeline, about the investigation, about the other employees mentioned in the report, about whether I had attempted to resolve this through the company's internal processes before going public. I answered everything honestly, providing additional documentation where requested, connecting her with the private investigator who could corroborate the methods and findings, confirming that I was willing to be named in her story if necessary. This is going to cause significant problems for the people involved, LaShonda said toward the end of our conversation. Your husband's career will likely be impacted. The executive you're accusing will face professional consequences regardless of the investigation outcome. Are you prepared for that? My husband, I said, made choices that caused those consequences. Simone Winters made choices that caused those consequences. I'm just making sure the consequences actually happen instead of being hidden and enabling the pattern to continue with new victims at new companies. Fair enough, LaShonda said. "I'll have a story ready for publication within 48 hours. I'll send you a draft for fact-checking before we go to press." By the time I left Keisha's office at 2:00 p.m., my entire life had been legally dismantled and set in motion toward dissolution. Divorce papers filed, HR investigation initiated, news story pending publication. Everything Marcus and I had built together over 7 years was being systematically taken apart, documented, divided, and prepared for final separation. I drove home, or what had been home, knowing that within days or weeks I would likely need to find somewhere else to live, depending on how property division proceedings went. The house felt different now. Not comforting or familiar, just empty. All the furniture we had selected together, the paint colors we had debated, the improvements we had made, they felt like artifacts from someone else's life. A life I had believed in, but which had been based on assumptions that no longer held. That Marcus loved me enough to be faithful, that our partnership mattered more than career advancement. That promises meant something. I sat on the couch Marcus and I had bought together 2 years ago, after spending 3 weekends visiting furniture stores and arguing about styles and fabrics, and I finally let myself feel what I had been holding back since 2 a.m. Not sadness, exactly. Not heartbreak in the way I had imagined heartbreak would feel, more like exhaustion, relief, freedom from pretending everything was fine when it manifestly was not, liberation from the version of myself who had been willing to ignore warning signs because confronting them felt too difficult or too frightening or too final. My sister Aaliyah arrived at 4 p.m., letting herself in with the spare key I had given her years ago. She took one look at me sitting on the couch in my professional suit, staring at nothing, and immediately sat down beside me. "Marcus called me at 4 a.m. and said you were ruining his life," she said. "Want to tell me what actually happened?" I told her everything. The text message, the confrontation, the investigation, the documentation I had sent to Marcus's company and to the reporter, the divorce papers I had filed this morning. Aaliyah listened without interrupting, her hand holding mine, her expression shifting from shock to anger to something like proud satisfaction. "Good," she said when I finished. "Fuck both of them. Marcus threw away your marriage for career advancement and an affair with his boss. She thought she could send you a cruel text message at 2 a.m. and you'd just collapse and disappear. Instead, you documented everything and exposed her pattern and made sure there were consequences. That's not revenge. That's accountability." "It feels like revenge," I admitted. "It feels like I took a nuclear option because I was hurt and angry." "Maybe," Aaliyah said. "But even if it started as hurt and anger, you didn't just lash out randomly. You hired an investigator. You gathered evidence. You consulted an attorney. You made sure everything you did was legal and documented, and you exposed behavior that was affecting other people, not just you. That's not revenge. That's whistleblowing." "Marcus is going to lose his job," I said. "Probably. His career in this industry might be over. He should have thought about that before fucking his boss and letting her send text messages from his phone," Aaliyah said bluntly. "He made choices. Those choices have consequences. That's not your fault." "Simone called me at 3 a.m. and threatened to destroy me," I said. "Said she had resources and connections I couldn't imagine. Said she would bury me in legal costs." "Let her try," Aaliyah said. "You have documentation. You have evidence. You have a pattern of behavior from her previous company. If she wants to make this a legal battle, everything becomes public record. That's the last thing she wants." Aaliyah stayed with me through the evening. We ordered food, watched terrible television neither of us was really paying attention to, and she slept in the guest room so I would not be alone in the house on the first night after everything had definitively ended. The next morning, LaShonda Williams' story was published. Front page of the business section. Executive at local consulting firm. Faces misconduct investigation. Pattern of inappropriate relationships with married subordinates documented across multiple companies. The article was thorough, detailed, professionally written. It named Simone Winters. It described the pattern of behavior documented in the private investigation. It included statements from former employees at her previous company who had been willing to speak on the record about similar conduct and about complaints that had been settled quietly with non-disclosure agreements. It mentioned Marcus by name as my soon-to-be ex-husband, but focused primarily on the power imbalance and the systemic nature of Simone's behavior, rather than on the specific details of the affair. By 10 a.m., the story had been shared thousands of times on social media. By noon, 3 national news outlets had picked it up and were running their own versions focusing on workplace harassment and executive accountability. By 3 p.m., the consulting firm released a statement saying Simone Winters had been placed on immediate administrative leave pending the outcome of a comprehensive internal investigation into allegations of misconduct. By 5 p.m., Marcus had been fired. Not officially for the affair, but for violations of company policy regarding appropriate professional relationships and conflicts of interest. I learned this from Aliyah, who had been monitoring social media and news coverage throughout the day while I sat in my living room trying to process what I had set in motion. "He's calling everyone," Aliyah reported, "claiming you destroyed his life, saying you're vindictive and couldn't handle that your marriage was over, trying to position himself as a victim." "Is anyone believing him?" I asked. "No," Aliyah said. "Everyone's pointing out that he had an affair with his boss, that he participated willingly in behavior that violated company policy, that he lost his job because of his own choices, not because of what you reported. The narrative he's trying to create isn't working." My phone buzzed. An email from Tyrone Chen at Marcus's former company. "Ms. Brooks, following up on our investigation, would you be available for a formal interview next week? We're speaking with all relevant parties and need to document your account of events and the information you received from the private investigation." I responded that I would make myself available whenever they needed. 3 days later, I sat in a conference room at the consulting firm with Tyrone Chen, 2 other HR representatives, and a corporate attorney. They asked detailed questions about the timeline, about what I had known and when, about the text message Simone had sent, about the private investigation, about the other employees mentioned in the report. I answered everything honestly, providing additional documentation where requested, remaining calm and factual throughout the 3-hour interview. When they asked why I had chosen to report the information to the company rather than keeping it private for my divorce proceedings, I gave them the same answer I had given Tyrone on the phone. Because this wasn't just about my marriage. This was about a pattern of behavior by an executive who was using her authority to pursue sexual relationships with subordinate employees. That's a liability for your company. That's behavior that needed to be investigated and addressed before it continued with additional victims. The attorney made notes but did not challenge my characterization. 1 week after the initial news story, the consulting firm released another statement. Simone Winters' employment had been terminated effective immediately following the conclusion of their internal investigation. The investigation had substantiated allegations of violations of company policy regarding appropriate professional relationships, abuse of authority, and creating conflicts of interest through personal relationships with subordinate employees. The company was implementing new training protocols and oversight mechanisms to prevent similar situations in the future. Marcus attempted to file a wrongful termination lawsuit, claiming the company had fired him without due process and based on unsubstantiated allegations. The lawsuit was dismissed within 2 weeks. The allegations were documented, his participation was voluntary, and his termination was consistent with company policy regarding professional conduct. 2 other wives contacted me through LaShonda Williams after the news story published. Their husbands worked at the consulting firm. They had noticed the same patterns I had noticed. Late nights, business trips, emotional distance, password-protected phones. They had suspected affairs but had not had confirmation until Simone's pattern became public. One of them, Destiny Thompson, filed for divorce within a week of contacting me. The other, Michelle Sanders, chose to attempt reconciliation with her husband, conditional on his complete transparency, termination of all contact with Simone, and commitment to intensive marriage counseling. I respected both decisions. Everyone's circumstances were different. Everyone's tolerance for broken trust was different. Everyone's assessment of whether a relationship could be repaired was personal and valid. I provided both women with contact information for Keisha Harrison, my attorney, and for Vincent Rodriguez, the private investigator who had documented the pattern. I shared the evidence that was relevant to their situations. I offered to speak with them if they wanted to talk with someone who understood what they were experiencing. 3 months after that text message had arrived at 2:00 a.m., my divorce from Marcus was finalized. The settlement was equitable. I retained half the equity in our house and chose to buy out his share rather than selling, which meant taking on a larger mortgage, but also meant keeping the home I had invested so much in improving and maintaining. We divided our retirement accounts and investments according to state law. I walked away from the marriage with my financial security intact and with the satisfaction of knowing I had ended things on my own terms, rather than staying in a situation that had been failing long before I was willing to admit it. Marcus attempted to contact me several times during those 3 months. Emails, text messages, attempts to show up at the house that I did not answer. In every message, he tried different approaches. Apologizing, blaming Simone for seducing him, claiming the affair had meant nothing, insisting we could still save our marriage if I would just forgive him and move forward. Then when apologies failed, anger. Accusations that I had overreacted, that I had been vindictive, that I had destroyed his career out of spite, that I had violated his privacy by hiring an investigator, that I had no right to report his personal life to his employer. I responded to exactly one of these messages, sending a single email that said, "You lost your job because you violated company policy by having an affair with your supervisor. You lost our marriage because you chose that affair over our partnership. Those were your choices. These are the consequences. Do not contact me again except through our attorneys regarding divorce proceedings." He did not contact me again. Simone attempted legal action, filing a defamation lawsuit claiming I had made false statements that damaged her professional reputation. The lawsuit was dismissed within a month. Nothing I had reported was false. Everything was documented with evidence. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation claims. 6 months after the divorce, I sold the house. Too many memories, too much history, too difficult to move forward while living in space that Marcus and I had shared. I bought a downtown loft, smaller but entirely my own, with floor-to-ceiling windows and clean, modern lines, and absolutely no association with my previous life. I threw myself into my work, taking on challenging architectural projects, winning bids for sustainable housing developments that allowed me to use my skills toward creating better communities. I reconnected with friends I had neglected during the years when Marcus's career had consumed all our time and energy. I rebuilt my relationship with Aaliyah into something deeper and more honest than it had been before. I started therapy to process the grief and anger and betrayal I had been holding back while handling the practical logistics of ending my marriage and exposing Simone's pattern. 1 year after that text message, LaShonda Williams contacted me again. She was writing a follow-up story about what had changed in workplace harassment policies at consulting firms since Simone's termination and the publicity around the case. 3 other companies had implemented new training protocols, specifically addressing power imbalances and appropriate boundaries between supervisors and subordinates. 2 industry organizations had revised their codes of conduct to explicitly prohibit romantic or sexual relationships between employees at significantly different hierarchical levels. Destiny Thompson, One of the other wives who had contacted me after the initial story had joined a nonprofit organization advocating for stronger workplace harassment protections and was using her experience to push for policy changes at the state level. Your decision to go public, LaShonda said during our interview for the follow-up article, changed the conversation about executive accountability and about how companies handle complaints about people in positions of power. You made it harder for the next Simone Winters to operate with impunity. That's significant. I didn't do it to change policy, I admitted. I did it because I was angry and hurt and wanted there to be consequences for behavior that had caused harm. Maybe, LaShonda said. But impact matters more than initial motivation. You took action that exposed a pattern and created accountability. Whether you intended to or not, that made things better for other people facing similar situations. 2 years after that text message, I was living a life that bore almost no resemblance to the one I had been living when my phone buzzed at 2:01 a.m. I was single, financially stable, professionally successful, and genuinely happy in ways I had not been during the final years of my marriage when I had been telling myself everything was fine, while Marcus grew more distant and more consumed by ambitions that did not include our partnership. I had not dated seriously, though I had gone on a few casual dates that had not developed into anything substantial. I was not ready for that kind of vulnerability yet. Not ready to trust someone new with access to hurt me the way Marcus had, but I was open to the possibility eventually, when I felt more healed and more certain about what I wanted from a partnership. I had joined the board of a nonprofit supporting women leaving difficult relationships, using my architectural skills to help design safe housing facilities, and using my personal experience to understand what courage it required to walk away from situations that were harmful or diminishing. I had maintained occasional contact with Destiny and Michelle, checking in a few times a year, offering support when they needed someone who understood what they had experienced. I had developed a friendship with LaShonda Williams, the reporter who had covered the story and who shared my belief that exposing patterns of harm was necessary work even when it was uncomfortable or difficult. Sometimes late at night when I could not sleep, I would remember that text message. He's mine now. He's occupied. Don't wait up. I would remember the cold clarity that had settled over me, the decision to respond with 7 words rather than paragraphs of pain, the choice to document and expose rather than suffer in silence. Simone had thought she was announcing a victory, claiming territory, demonstrating power. Instead, she had handed me exactly the evidence I needed to dismantle her carefully constructed professional facade and expose a pattern of behavior she had been hiding for years. She had thought that text would break me, would reduce me to the role of devastated wife who would quietly disappear while she continued her pattern with new targets in new locations. Instead, it freed me. It freed me from a marriage that had been failing long before I was willing to admit it. It freed me from the version of myself who had been willing to ignore warning signs because confronting them felt too difficult. It freed me to build something new and honest and entirely my own. Because the truth is simpler than any revenge plot. People who treat others as disposable eventually discover they themselves are disposable. And women who refuse to accept cruelty at 2:00 in the morning sometimes become the architects of accountability that changes entire industries. If this story of calculated justice had you captivated from that shocking 2:00 a.m. text message all the way through to Jada's hard-won freedom, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Jada calmly told Simone she had hired a private investigator 6 weeks earlier and had been documenting everything, watching that corporate confidence crumble in real time. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more compelling stories of courage and accountability like this one. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.